Before Prince took his final breath, something unfolded inside Paisley Park that still haunts investigators to this day. A house protected by one of the most advanced surveillance networks in Minnesota suddenly went blind. Every hallway, every studio door, every exterior entrance, dark. 48 hours before his body was discovered, the entire system shut down, not due to a glitch, not due to weather, but by deliberate human action. Police later confirmed it. And when his sister Tyka Nelson learned that an unknown individual had entered the compound that final night, her voice reportedly cracked. Someone had been inside. Someone had touched those cameras. And whatever happened within that manufactured silence is the very question this case forces us to confront. To uncover Prince's last hours, investigators had to begin with the one place he believed would always protect him, Paisley Park. To the public it was a mansion. To him it was a fortress, born from years of lawsuits, stalkers, disputed ownership of his catalog, and people trying to manipulate the legacy he built with his bare hands. By the early 2000s, Prince no longer trusted the music industry. He distrusted reporters. He even began doubting some people he once considered close. Friends later described how he moved with the alertness of a man who felt eyes on him. Staff said he slept lightly, checked locks twice, sometimes 3 times, and walked the corridors quietly at night, as if listening for footsteps that didn't belong to him. That is why in 2014, he made a decision that would later become one of the most crucial details of the investigation. He upgraded the entire surveillance grid at Paisley Park. High-definition cameras were placed in the front entrance, the long east hallway, the recording wings, the backstage tunnels, and every exterior door on the property. More than a dozen cameras monitored movement around the clock, not out of showmanship, but out of fear. There were incidents the world never heard. Packages with no sender, random strangers showing up at the gate insisting they had meetings with him, hidden disputes over unreleased tracks worth millions. Whether the threats were exaggerated or real didn't matter. Prince believed them, and to him, that was reason enough to watch everything. But this is the most important piece of the puzzle. Only 4 people had access to the master controls of the system: Prince himself. Kirk Johnson, his longtime friend and assistant, one of the rare individuals allowed inside without calling ahead. A private security technician responsible for maintenance, and a 4th person never publicly named, listed in documents only as a non-public employee with elevated clearance. Almost a phantom in the case. When investigators later combed through system logs, the results were chilling. There was no malfunction, no power failure, no corrupted wiring. The cameras were deactivated manually, 1 feed at a time, in a sequence that required someone with intimate knowledge of the building's security design. And because only 4 people had that level of access, every question that followed circled back to that tiny, exclusive group. What was unfolding inside Paisley Park during that final week? Why would a man who depended on those cameras suddenly be left without surveillance? And whose decision turned the entire compound blind at the worst possible time? Even more disturbing was the emotional shift people witnessed in Prince during those last days. He was withdrawn, quieter than usual, strangely unsettled. A man who relied on watching screens suddenly found them black, unresponsive, and silent. If he noticed, and many who knew him swear he did, then he spent his final hours believing someone close had shut down the last layer of protection he trusted. In a normal case, a surveillance failure would be unfortunate. But here, with these circumstances and this timing, it became the beating heart of the mystery. A house full of cameras, yet not a second of footage from the last 48 hours, and 4 individuals who could explain why. In May 2017, under harsh studio lights inside NBC Minneapolis, Tyka Nelson finally spoke. Her hands trembled in her lap as the interviewer asked the question her family avoided: "Do you believe Prince died from an accident?" She stared at the ground, she inhaled, and then she said the words that shifted the entire direction of the investigation. "There were people around my brother, people our family had never met. Taika explained that in the final weeks of April 2016, a man quietly appeared inside Prince's schedule, arranging meetings, blocking visits after the emergency landing, and moving like someone with authority. Someone who wasn't staff. Someone no one recognized. Then came the detail that silenced the studio. On April 20th, she whispered, "He was inside Paisley Park late at night. He had no reason to be there." But the real shock arrived the next morning when investigators requested the surveillance footage. Every single camera feed, the hallways, the studio entrances, the external doors, showed nothing. A complete blackout stretching 48 hours. Taika Sip's voice cracked as she spoke. Someone turned them off. And someone knows why. She wasn't just mourning, she was pointing a finger. The blackout began days earlier, but no one realized it. In the final week of Prince's life, events inside Paisley Park moved with an eerie precision, like the slow winding of a clock heading toward its final tick. It all began on April 14, 2016. At 1:10 a.m., Prince's private jet was forced into an emergency landing after he collapsed mid-flight. Paramedics claimed he was minutes from death. Kirk Johnson, traveling with him, called physician Dr. Michael Schulenberg and told him to be available when they returned home. But when Prince walked back into Paisley Park that morning, around 8:45 a.m., something strange happened. A hallway camera, a feed that rarely, if ever, malfunctioned, blinked to black for 2 seconds before restoring itself. No one paid attention at the time. Only later did investigators identify this as the first moment the system began to fail. Staff who saw him that morning also remembered something else. He didn't look relieved to be alive. He looked shaken, jumpy, glancing behind him as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. 2 days later, on April 16th, something even more unusual occurred. A man no one in the family recognized suddenly appeared in Prince's internal schedule, coordinating appointments, speaking with staff, and making decisions that normally required Prince's explicit approval. And just days later, all the cameras would fall completely dark. The man who suddenly appeared in Prince's orbit during those last days wasn't just a stranger, he was a disruption. He blocked a hospital follow-up that Prince's staff believed was necessary, calmly telling them it wouldn't be needed. Prince didn't oppose him, he didn't agree either. He simply watched the man with a quiet, unreadable stare. That strange, unspoken tension lingered in the halls of Paisley Park like a shadow no one could name. Then came April 18th, the day the security system suffered its first undeniable blow. At around 3:12 p.m., a staff member walking past the control room noticed something alarming. The monitor linked to the studio hallway wasn't frozen or glitching, it was completely black. Dead, the staff member immediately informed Prince. He entered the room, leaned toward the darkened feed, and whispered, "Someone's been in here." His voice wasn't angry, it was resigned, almost as if this confirmed something he had suspected all along. When the technician offered to come by for an urgent inspection, Prince simply said, "Not yet." Whether he hesitated out of fear, distrust, or exhaustion, no one knows, but that single decision would later haunt every investigator who reviewed the case. 24 hours later, on April 19th at roughly 9:30 p.m., the most crucial camera in the entire compound, the one guarding the central studio corridor, lost its signal. This was the camera that captured Prince every night as he moved between Studio A, the rehearsal rooms, and the vault where decades of unreleased material were stored. When the security technician checked the system remotely, he told Kirk Johnson that someone needed to physically examine the wiring and verify whether there had been tampering. But before he could make the drive to Paisley Park, someone from the inner circle placed a call canceling the repair, claiming Prince no longer wanted it. The technician immediately sensed something was wrong. "Prince never told me that himself," he later said under oath. By this point, several cameras had failed, but only in the areas Prince used the most. And then came April 20th, The night everything veered into chilling territory. At exactly 11:40 p.m., the East Side service door logged an entry from a temporary access card created 3 days before. The name assigned to that card didn't match any long-term employee. No staff member admitted creating it. The family didn't recognize the identity, and Prince had not approved any temporary access that week. Even worse, the cameras that should have covered that wing had gone down earlier in the week, each one failing at a different time, like someone testing blind spots and eliminating coverage step by step. The unidentified man walked through the dark corridor, disappeared deeper into the property, and stayed inside for nearly half an hour. The only reason investigators knew when he left was because one exterior camera, one of the last still alive, captured the door opening again. No image of his face, no shadow, no silhouette. All interior coverage had already been erased. This was the detail that shattered Tika Nelson when investigators finally told her what had happened. And it was this exact moment she later referred to on live television when she said, "Someone was in that house and my brother Sip's cameras were off." By sunrise on April 21st, the day Prince was discovered unresponsive, the entire surveillance network had collapsed. When paramedics asked for the footage, security staff walked them to the control room, where rows of monitors reflected nothing but black squares. Not static, not corrupted files, just pure, absolute darkness. Investigators immediately recognized a deliberate pattern. These cameras had not died randomly. They had been shut down methodically, in sequence, in the exact areas that mattered the most: the hallway leading to Prince's private quarters, the route connecting the studios, the service door, and the path the unknown visitor traveled just hours earlier. At 9:43 a.m., Kirk Johnson and members of the team found Prince on the floor near the elevator. When police arrived shortly afterward, their first request was straightforward: "We need surveillance from the previous 48 hours. What they got instead was the most suspicious discovery in the entire case. The final 2 days before Prince died, arguably the most important time window, simply didn't exist. Every camera had gone dark in the same general time frame. And the locations of those dead cameras matched precisely with the mysterious visitor's movements. This was not an electrical failure. This was not a storm. This was not coincidence. It was intentional. The gravity of that realization, the missing hours, the silent screens, the deliberate erasure is what made Tika Nelson say the words that still echo through the Prince community. Someone shut him off, and somebody knows why. To her, the blackout wasn't just a technical event. It was a signal that her brother's last week wasn't accidental or chaotic. It was a sequence, a slow tightening of pressure. A 7-day decline marked by precise failures in the exact places where Prince should have been protected. Once investigators mapped the full timeline, one name surfaced repeatedly with a consistency that made even seasoned detectives uneasy: Kirk Johnson. Kirk wasn't simply a musician friend or a longtime confidant. Inside Paisley Park, he functioned as Prince's operational backbone, the person who coordinated daily movements, allowed or denied entry, arranged rehearsals, contacted doctors, and oversaw logistics. He had the keys. He had the alarm codes, and he had unrestricted access to the surveillance hub. In a property where nearly every door and hallway was watched, that gave him tremendous power. But something else made his role even more concerning. The pattern of camera failures matched the exact areas Kirk moved through most frequently. Staff recalled hearing him casually instruct a technician to take a few cameras offline for routine maintenance about a week before Prince died, an extremely unusual request in a mansion where cameras were rarely shut down under any circumstance. The technician later insisted the system could have been repaired without disabling anything. And when investigators aligned the timeline, the cameras Kirk suggested didn't need full coverage were the same ones that later went dark: the east corridor, the main studio pathway, and the service door route. Some fans have offered gentler theories, suggesting Kirk might have been trying to protect Prince during a vulnerable moment. Others believe he could have been shielding someone else. and a small but vocal corner of the Prince community claims he may have been pressured by external forces linked to Prince's catalog, though no official evidence ever confirmed this. Still, the fact remained. Kirk was the last known person to see Prince alive, and the one who initiated the call surrounding the emergency landing days earlier. Whether unfair or inevitable, those details keep him at the center of every unofficial investigation, every theory, and every unanswered question that still lingers around the death of Prince. The story takes a sharper, more unsettling turn when you add Dr. Michael Schulenberg, the physician whose involvement is wrapped in contradictions that investigators still debate. He was the one who examined Prince after the emergency landing on April 14th. He later admitted he had prescribed opioids, not under Prince's name, but under Kirk Johnson's. He called it a simple act of protecting Prince's privacy. The FBI disagreed, labeling it improper medical conduct and fining him for it. Yet the issue that disturbed investigators wasn't the prescription, it was the sequence of events surrounding it. Between April 14th and April 20th, Schulenberg visited Paisley Park multiple times, but the official logs didn't capture every one of his visits. Some entries were missing, some were never recorded. And what made matters more alarming was that the cameras monitoring the passage leading to the room used as Prince's makeshift medical area had already died on April 19th. One detective later wrote in a report, "There should have been footage of the doctor entering and leaving. There wasn't." Fans quickly split into factions trying to interpret the doctor's role. Some insisted he was nothing more than a careless physician who handled a delicate situation poorly. Others believed he was desperately trying to treat a declining medical crisis without creating a media storm around one of the world's most famous musicians. But on fringe forums, especially those obsessed with Prince's battles over ownership of his catalog, the theories grew darker. Was the doctor genuinely unaware of the events unfolding inside Paisley Park, or was he minimizing his connection to the timeline? Tyka Nelson once hinted during an interview that someone wasn't being entirely honest, and many believe she was referring to Schulenberg. His calm, emotionless demeanor during interviews only fueled speculation that he knew more than he was willing to admit. Yet even then, the most haunting figure in the narrative was not the doctor. It wasn't even Kirk. It was the unnamed scheduling manager, the man Tyka refers to simply as the stranger. He appeared in Prince's schedule on April 16th out of nowhere. This man controlled which visitors could enter the property. He dismissed the notion that Prince needed medical follow-up. He organized rehearsals and set appointments. He operated with an authority Prince's family had never seen before. No one in the Nelson family recognized him. Prince never introduced him publicly. Yet inside Paisley Park, he acted like someone who had been given full administrative command. Investigators soon discovered something even more disturbing. This same man had been physically inside Paisley Park on the night of April 20th. His entry was logged at 11:40 p.m. using a temporary access card that no long-term staff member admitted creating. But the cameras that should have shown him walking through the door were already offline. When he left 28 minutes later, only a single exterior camera, one of the last functioning, captured the service door opening. No figure, no face, just a timestamp. Fans have built countless theories about him. Some believe he was only a temporary coordinator caught in the middle of chaos. Others suspect he may have been connected to business interests wanting access to Prince's unreleased vault, one of the most valuable collections of music in the world. A few fan communities even speculate he was the same man seen accompanying Prince to private meetings in late 2015, though nothing has ever confirmed this. What is undeniable is that this man held influence Prince never fully explained and access he never fully justified. Still, the darkest presence in the entire story revolves around the fourth access holder, the ghost technician whose identity remains sealed. Investigators described him only as a specialized contractor with elevated clearance. He wasn't staff, he wasn't family, he wasn't someone fans ever saw. Yet he had the ability to override the camera system remotely, wipe logs, disable feeds, or hide user traces. In other words, he was one of the only individuals capable of shutting down the cameras without being detected. Fan communities seized on this detail more aggressively than anything else. Some believe the technician acted alone. Others think he followed instructions from someone positioned above him, perhaps tied to powerful players within the entertainment world. And more conspiratorial circles claim he may have been connected to people who stood to gain financially from Prince's death, particularly because Prince left no will and his vault held an almost unimaginable value. None of these theories have ever been proven, but the fact that his identity remains sealed, when nearly everyone else involved has been publicly named, continues to feed the belief that what he knew, or what he did, was considered too sensitive to reveal. When the final timeline is assembled, the four men circling Prince in his last days form a chilling constellation. Kirk, the insider with access to every room; the doctor, managing potent medications under questionable circumstances; the stranger, quietly controlling Prince's schedule, movements, and visitors; the unseen technician, capable of plunging all cameras into darkness with a few keystrokes. Each man had a reason to be there. Each left behind unanswered questions, and in the middle of them stood Prince, vulnerable, unnerved, increasingly alone, wandering through the dim corridors of Paisley Park with security cameras designed to protect him, only to have them vanish one by one. Tika Sit's voice trembled when she said, "Someone turned those cameras off," but the words she added next were even more haunting. "And I think one of them knows why." Rumors about Prince's final days always return to one central theme: money. Not ordinary wealth, but the kind of legendary fortune that only a handful of artists in history possess. Fans often joke that Prince's vault was worth more than the GDP of small countries. Inside that vault, the story grows even darker. Throughout the 2000s, Prince fought relentlessly for control of his masters. After decades of tension with record labels, he refused to sell them, refused to negotiate, refused to let anyone alter what he considered the sacred core of his life's work. And by early 2016, it was widely known that he was preparing a new legal strategy, one that could shift the balance of power again, potentially disrupting long-standing agreements. Fans on message boards still quote a line he supposedly said in 2015, "If anything happens to me, they'll try to take it." No one knows if he truly said it, but it spread so fast that it became a kind of ghost story circulating within the fandom. When Prince died without a will, the whispers only intensified. What complicated everything further was the tension simmering within Paisley Park in the years leading up to his death. Prince had quietly dismissed multiple staff members across 2014 and 2015, lighting crew, logistics workers, a studio engineer, even a longtime collaborator. People were being removed, access was tightening, trust was shrinking, and for those who believe Prince sensed danger, this pattern became the final thread that tied everything together. To outsiders, it looked like Prince was merely restructuring his staff. But people who lived close to the pulse of Paisley Park whispered a different version, one where Prince was becoming increasingly suspicious, inward, and intolerant of anything that made him feel observed or controlled. Minneapolis locals later recalled seeing him glide through grocery stores late at night, wearing dark glasses indoors, moving silently, choosing self-checkout lanes, as if trying to pass through public spaces without leaving a single trace of himself behind. Inside Paisley Park, staff members said his behavior had become even more unpredictable. There were nights when he would suddenly appear in a corridor at 2 a.m., fully dressed, as though he'd heard a noise or sensed a presence he couldn't quite name. The atmosphere around him, according to people who had known him for decades, felt increasingly delicate. Some felt pushed away. Others felt quietly replaced. A few left with wounds that would never fully close. As Prince pulled further away from the outside world, He reduced his circle of trust to something almost impossibly small. Fans often repeated that Prince had only ever truly opened his heart to a handful of people. Whether that number was 3 or 5 or none at all, the truth was clear. In his final years, he lived inside an emotional bunker. This isolation deepened as his hip pain worsened. He abandoned aggressive touring, avoided large crowds, and leaned heavily on a select few to help him through daily routines. In early 2016, there were days when he reportedly spoke to only 1 or 2 people, and with that level of dependence came unspoken power shifts. Fans speculated endlessly about how dangerous that could be. When one person becomes the gatekeeper of appointments, another regulates medication, and another controls daily logistics, the lines between support and control blur. Trust thins, rumors seep into the silence, and small cracks begin to look like fractures. Financial speculation merged with personal tension as the community constructed theories, each more intricate than the last. Some believed long-standing disputes over master recordings and publishing rights had resurfaced at precisely the wrong moment. Others pointed to rumors that Prince had been preparing a new business strategy in early 2016, one that could have challenged old agreements or unsettled the wrong people. There was also the emotional side. Prince had a history of ending professional relationships abruptly. No arguments, no final conversation, no explanation, just distance. A former dancer once said, "Prince didn't break ties, he disappeared." Fans took that quote and used it to explain the 5 staff dismissals in the 2 years before he died, imagining wounded egos, silent grudges, and people feeling blindsided by their sudden exile from his orbit. Yet those tense whispers still seemed mild compared to the darkest beliefs circulating through fan communities, that Prince's withdrawal from the world made him vulnerable to being misled, shielded, or even manipulated by the people around him. Some forums insisted that by 2016, Prince no longer had full awareness of who controlled different parts of his life. They believed certain individuals filtered information, controlled who got access to him, and curated his world like a velvet curtain slowly drawing shut. Others blamed Prince himself, arguing that his refusal to trust doctors, refusal to seek comprehensive medical care, and refusal to expand his circle contributed to the isolation that ultimately swallowed him. Distrust mixed with vulnerability, forming the perfect storm for confusion, suspicion, and fear. All of these swirling interpretations eventually led to the moment that broke open the conversation, Tyka Nelson's explosive interview. It wasn't her tone that shook the fandom, it was the questions she asked. When she stared into the camera and said, "Why were the cameras off? Who turned them off? Who was in his house the night before he died?" the entire world paused. The fan community erupted overnight. Her final line became the most repeated sentence in all discussions about Prince's death. "One of them knows the answer." People dissected that phrase as though it were evidence. Some said one of them meant Prince's inner circle. Others insisted she was referring to someone outside the known narrative. The darkest corner of the fandom believed Tyka had said as much as she was allowed to, that she feared revealing more. On Reddit, on YouTube breakdowns, on fan forums, people argued endlessly about which word Tyka emphasized most strongly: someone, cameras, or knows. Each interpretation gave rise to a new theory. Some said the cameras were shut off to protect Prince during a medical emergency. Others believed the blackout was a cover for someone entering Paisley Park without authorization. But the rumor with the strongest grip, the one that refuses to die, is the belief that whoever turned off the cameras was someone Prince trusted, someone he wouldn't question, someone who walked freely inside those walls. And so the mythology grew. The week before Prince's death transformed into a labyrinth of motives, hidden tensions, and private shadows. Every silence felt suspicious. Every missing log felt like a clue. Every name mentioned near him in those final days became another piece of the puzzle. As more time passed, the fandom filled in the gaps with its own fears and theories. Today, the final week of Prince's life is remembered not as a clean series of events, but as a fog, dense, shifting, full of unanswered questions, blurred loyalties, and the disturbing belief that the truth behind those darkened cameras may still live inside the mind of one person who has never spoken publicly. After Tyka Nelson made the statement that set the entire fandom ablaze, the tone of the investigation changed in ways no one anticipated. Until then, authorities had treated the case as a tragic medical incident. There were reports, toxicology results, interviews with doctors, everything pointed to an accidental overdose. But Tyka's calm, piercing questions forced both the public and investigators to re-examine every detail that didn't sit comfortably in the narrative. Law enforcement revisited the surveillance logs. They studied access card timestamps. They questioned staff again about who was present during specific nights. They reconstructed Prince's movements hour by hour. The official conclusion, accidental death, never changed. But the investigation developed a parallel layer, one that existed not in police records but in the conversations of fans, journalists, and observers. People began wondering whether the unanswered questions existed because nothing sinister occurred, or because something subtle had been overlooked. The camera blackout became the burning center of that debate. Authorities acknowledged that the cameras were off, but insisted it did not influence the cause of death. The public was not satisfied. Media outlets published diagrams of Paisley Park. Independent reporters examined maintenance logs and staffing changes. Fans created their own timelines, piecing together Prince's final rehearsals, phone calls, and private meetings. No one was openly accusing anyone of wrongdoing, but everyone was looking for clarity. And clarity never came. The unanswered details in Prince's story never amounted to evidence of foul play, but they stretched the emotional gravity of the investigation far beyond anything written in official reports. While authorities insisted the case was medically straightforward, the atmosphere surrounding it only grew heavier. Meanwhile, the battle over Prince's estate turned into one of the most tangled probate fights in Minnesota's history. With no will left behind, the court was forced to identify legal heirs, appraise massive assets, determine who had management authority, and eventually auction off portions of his holdings to cover staggering tax demands. What shocked fans most was how quickly financial necessity eclipsed the privacy Prince guarded so fiercely. Once his vault and catalog entered the legal arena, information he had protected for decades suddenly passed through the hands of people who had never even met him. Decisions about Prince's music were no longer under his control, and not even fully in his family's. Corporations, banks, attorneys, accountants, and estate managers now shared the authority he fought his whole life to keep. This was the part of the aftermath that weighed heaviest on Tyka. She wasn't a strategist. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't trained to navigate a corporate maze. She was simply a sister grieving the only person who truly understood the scars of their childhood. Now she found herself sitting through meetings discussing percentages, licensing, vault inventories, and publishing rights. She once confided to a family friend, "My brother kept the world out of his music, and now everyone is invited in." Her grief fused with an ache she could never quite shake, the feeling that she was failing to protect the legacy of the person she loved most. In the years after his death, Tyka's life shifted in ways she never anticipated. She stayed in Minneapolis but kept quietly to herself, avoiding crowds and turning down most interviews. She refused to comment further about the cameras or the lingering questions that haunted the public. She visited Paisley Park only a few times after it was converted into a museum. Every visit came with a weight she couldn't escape. Those who accompanied her described the same ritual. She would walk the hallway leading toward the elevator, stop at the threshold, stare inside for a long, heavy moment, then turn away without stepping in. Whether that hesitation was grief, respect, or fear, no one dared to ask. Her relationship with the estate moved in waves. She supported some decisions, opposed others. She often pushed for choices that aligned with what she believed Prince would have wanted: creative respect, integrity, and authenticity above all. But her voice was only one among many, in a machine driven by business necessities. One of her lasting regrets was that she never had more influence, never had the power to shield her brother's art from commercial tug-of-war. It wasn't anger she felt, but sorrow, the kind that settles softly and never loosens its grip. Over time, Taika became a symbol within the fan community, not of controversy, but of loyalty. Fans wrote to her, some offering love, others sharing theories she never acknowledged. She learned to live with the echo of strangers' opinions. She didn't fight them. Everyone grieves in their own way, she once said privately. Some people search for answers, some search for someone to blame, some just want the story to make sense. What she never said publicly, but what those close to her sensed, was that she herself still longed for the story to make sense. She never softened her original questions, she never apologized for raising them, but she never pushed them further either. She let them exist as they were, questions suspended between grief and truth. She understood they would haunt people. She understood they would spark speculation. But she also knew her questions reflected her own experience, that something about her brother's final hours felt unfinished, unresolved, incomplete. Prince's tragedy didn't unravel into a scandal, nor did it evolve into a criminal case. It rested somewhere in the uneasy space between certainty and doubt. The medical cause was simple. The emotional context was not. Taika carried that contradiction quietly, without drama, without headlines. In the end, she once said, "I lost my brother. Everything after that is just noise." She learned to live around the pain. She returned to church, repaired family relationships, and found small pieces of herself rebuilding. But the ache never fully dissolved. In rare private conversations, she admitted 2 regrets that held on the tightest, that she didn't see him more often during his final month, and that she wasn't there the night the cameras went dark. "I would have sat up with him all night," she whispered. "I would have checked every hour. I would have asked who he was letting in. I would have asked if he felt afraid. But the past, once written, cannot be rewritten." For Taika, the last chapter of Prince's life remains a blend of grief, love, unanswered questions, and a fragile wish that someday the pieces of that week will fall into place. Not because she expects dramatic revelations, not because she believes hidden evidence will emerge, but because she believes every story, even the ones drenched in heartbreak, deserve a moment of clarity. The final words she spoke in that now famous interview still echo, not as an accusation, but as the raw expression of a sister wounded by loss. One of them knows the answer. Prince is gone, yet the tremor in his sister's voice reminds us that closure doesn't always arrive in the form of official statements or legal documents. Sometimes closure is born from conversation, from the courage to ask questions others don't dare touch. And now, we turn that question to you. If you could speak to Taika, if you could ask one question about Prince's last days, what would it be? Share it below. Maybe, just maybe, many of us are still searching for the same truth.